Good afternoon. On behalf of the Thomas County Historical Society, I'd like to welcome each and every one of you. We're delighted to have you here as we remember Finney General Hospital, and we're particularly looking forward to some personal recollections this afternoon. We have Mrs. Catherine Reed with us. We have Martha Lane Davis, who worked at Finney, and we have Joe and Francis Parker here, who spearheaded the drive to commemorate Finney and the impact it had on the community and the hundreds and thousands of lives it touched with an historic marker, which we'll tell you a little bit more about later. So I thought first, if I can get this machine to cooperate, that I would give you a photographic review, and those of you who remember Finney may see people and places that you can remember, and some of you who may be new to Thomasville may learn more about this historic part of our community. Okay, we're getting close here. Hold on. There we go. One of the things those of us who study Thomas County history find to be a recurring theme is that this is certainly a can-do community and takes what we today would call a proactive stance when it comes to challenges. I'm sure that those of you who've lived here all your life have found that to be true. And Finney certainly exemplifies that attitude. Within weeks, possibly even days, of the bombing of Pearl Harbor that brought the United States into World War II, a retired Army colonel living in Thomasville, Colonel William Noble, began talking to businessmen about the need that would be created for hospital facilities and the excellent opportunity Thomasville would have if they petitioned to have such a hospital here. They were very fortunate that the president of the Chamber of Commerce at that time,
was that Don Simmons?
No, but a name you'll recognize here at the bottom, Robert. Could I get you to turn off the lights since I don't see anyone else over there, and I think they'll be able to see the screen better? Thank you. Notice the name at the bottom. The gentleman who was president of the Chamber of Commerce at that time was none other than William H. Flowers, the president of Flowers Baking Company. And by April the 10th, as you'll see at the top of this letter, the Chamber of Commerce, here we go, Don, had prepared a 31-page brief giving all the reasons that Thomas County would be a most suitable location for a general hospital. Furthermore, he pledged not only the active cooperation of the Chamber of Commerce, but every civic club and each individual in the community in this effort and in the other effort necessary to effect victory. So they sent their package in, and you would recognize a lot of the things that they were touting. The statistical sheet that they prepared is a wonderful snapshot of the community in that time. Of course, they stressed the fact that they had 3 major highways, they had 2 railroads, they had a bus line, they had 22 miles of paved road. That did not include Pine Tree Boulevard out where the hospital wound up being located. But they were willing to do, remember, whatever it took to get it here. They also had already a 125-bed hospital, and of course an excellent library. And one of the things that was important and that was included in this brief was the distance from other military facilities, because they would be receiving patients from military bases. They also told of some of the amenities, the thriving business community, the brand new municipal building, the recreational opportunities with Glenarvan Country Club, and 3 theaters. Much of what they said, you could pick up the Chamber's current literature and you would recognize it. The mild climate, the beautiful living conditions, the hospitality, generosity, and culture typical of the community. Some things have changed though. 4 to 6 room houses were available for $15 and up. And houses larger than that went for $30 and up. They also wanted to be sure you understood how favorable the climate was, so they included the fact that dust storms were unknown and sleet was practically unknown. You might want to include that. They were notified by September of 1942 that indeed Thomasville had been selected for the site of Finney Hospital. They had offered several sites, and the site chosen as best meeting the needs was on the edge of the city limits out on Pine Tree Boulevard, and the site of the former Inwood Plantation, approximately 250 acres. This plantation had been previously owned by J. Morrison and J. Morse Eli. Finney literature actually says that the city of Thomasville purchased that property and donated it for the hospital. Construction began in November of 42. At the peak of construction, 4,000 workmen were working to complete the facilities at Finney. And I was doing some research the other day and ran across a fact that two teams were competing to see who could build a 150-foot-long building the fastest. The winning team built it in just over 7 hours, if that gives you any idea, from the ground up. December, they had named the hospital in honor of this gentleman, Brigadier General John Turpin Finney. Dr. Finney was a professor emeritus of surgery at Johns Hopkins University, a native of Natchez, Mississippi. He had died in 1942, but he was renowned worldwide for the efforts he made during World War I to bring surgery to the front. Instead of always taking the soldiers from the front to hospitals, he stressed the importance of battlefield medicine, which of course saved many lives. The hospital became the third general hospital, that is, built in the Southeast. Ultimately, across the United States, there were a total of 60 of these Army hospitals. The mission was to provide treatment for patients requiring the attention of specialists not ordinarily available at station hospitals, that is, those on military bases, and to care for patients whose injuries or illnesses required a long period of hospitalization with special nursing care. The commanding officer was also brought to Thomasville in December of 42, a gentleman named Samuel Brown, an imposing 6'4" tall, and 3 senior officers. This is Colonel Brown in the middle with 2 of the officers, Lieutenant Colonel Crenshaw Briggs, Lieutenant Colonel James McGivney, and also making up the 3 who helped chart the course of the hospital was Lieutenant Colonel Hilton Reed. And of course, we're delighted that Mrs. Reed is here with us and will be sharing some of her personal memories later. Dr. Reed, who was a native of New Jersey, had served at Walter Reed Hospital, and he was named the head of medical service at Finney. Early buildings completed included the headquarters, All Saints Chapel, which provided religious services for all denominations, barracks for the enlisted men, a dispensary, dental clinic, laboratory, and warehouses. Although the original plans called for all the buildings to be of hollow tile construction, they made changes and they built the wards of gypsum board. Colonel Brown discovered a serious flaw, though, in the original plans. There were no laundry facilities, and there was no capacity in Thomasville that could handle the volume of laundry. So Colonel Brown made arrangements with Florida Prison Industries in Tallahassee to provide laundry service, and they were soon processing 20,000 pieces of laundry a week. Staff assigned to the hospital included 110 officers, 220 nurses, 810 enlisted men, and 500 civilians. Housing was provided for most of the military assigned there on the base. There were some duplexes that Claire Thomas recently pointed out to me over here on the north end of Dawson Street that were off-base housing, and 3 Toms Inn was purchased to provide additional housing for female civilian employees. The first patient arrived at Finney in April of 1943, and the dedication services in honor of Brigadier General took place on June the 16th, 1943. Just over 5 weeks later, the first hospital troop train arrived, bringing patients from North Africa and the Southwest Pacific. As the hospital continued to expand, originally it was intended to accommodate 2,000 patients, but at times it was caring for close to 3,000. And enlisted men were needed more and more for assignments overseas. So there was constant turnover in the military staff, and they actually they actually brought in German prisoners of war to perform some of the labor in the mess hall particularly, and on some construction jobs. About 10 years ago, a gentleman from Germany visited the museum who had actually been a prisoner of war at Finney, and told that they also worked at times on the local plantations. Throughout 1943 and the early part of 1944, many of the soldiers treated at Finney were soldiers transferred from the military post in the southeast, but in 1944, it became more and more a hospital for combat injuries, with the orthopedic section caring for 40 to 50% of all of those who were being treated there. These are shots of some of the soldiers at Finney. Therapy of many different kinds was provided. We're not sure what this scene is. They also had a lot of Army educational courses. Those of you from the Army, I'm sure, can relate to that. But they also provided psychotherapy. So this could conceivably be a group therapy session. Notice that it is an integrated group also. There were many forms of occupational therapy. Weaving, as you see, this young soldier has completed a blanket. There were clay modeling workshops. This is a woodworking workshop, and lots of woodworking projects were undertaken by patients while they were recovering. In the case here to my left is a wooden tray that turned up on eBay, and one of our generous donors arranged to purchase it for the museum because it was made by a soldier who is engraved. They did wood burning, and he's burned his name on the back that it was done by Fritz Kobar in 1943 at Finney General Hospital. There's also a silk pillow made at Finney by a patient that turned up on eBay, because of course these soldiers were from all over the country, and those items went home with them all over the country. There was music. He's holding a guitar, a bit hard to see in this light, and sports of all forms as the soldiers were recuperating. Swimming, as you can imagine, in this heat was particularly popular, and Finney actually won a trophy for having the highest participation in athletics. We're not sure what this occasion was, but we thought it was interesting that the officers addressing the men from the diving board in the swimming pool. That's the gymnasium in the background there. There was a theater, and movies were shown at least twice a week. There was also an active little theater group called the Soldier Shows Workshop. These are scenes from some of the plays there and some of the set design. And there was a very active program coordinated by the USO to bring in entertainers, because entertainment was considered part of the healing process. This was a period when vaudeville was very popular, so there's several vaudeville acts that played there. And a very brave soldier, Leo Glickstein, who was performing for his fellow soldiers what appears to be a hula dance. We need a little help here. Philip's already hinted at this. Philip Wirtz. Is this Edwin on the right? Okay. Some people have said Buster Keaton, and neither Melissa or I can remember who this would have been. What about the lady to his right? Any idea? There are some pictures I'll show you in just a minute of Ann Miller. It looks a little like her, but I don't know whether they were there at the same time. They brought in Hollywood starlets to entertain. You see again the same gentleman, and here he is making his rounds of the ward. And this is Ann Miller. Very popular dance star. The gentleman she's pictured with is Captain Clark Wright, who was the head of public relations for Finney. And we're fortunate to have many of these pictures because Captain Wright saved these, and his daughter returned to Thomasville several years ago and brought them and donated them to the museum. So most of these that were not taken from published sources are from the Wright collection. I think Sarah Martha was friends and maintained a relationship with that family for many years. Another scene of Ann Miller doing a very popular performance on the wards. There were other celebrities that visited. Tom Faircloth just gave me a picture which Melissa immediately took to mount and put on the wall because we'd always heard that Cary Grant visited, but we didn't have a picture until today, and now we do. So thank you, Tom. And from Mrs. Reed. Thank you, Mrs. Reed. And also Smiley Burnett was there, and the very inspirational Helen Keller came to town and spoke to the troops. There was a glee club at Finney. There were dances of all kinds, from casual to formal. You can see a St. Patrick's Day invitation and a formal dance celebrating the one-year anniversary. The 395th Army Services Band was actually stationed at Finney and performed for many of these occasions. That's Colonel Brown leading people into the dance, and another. This is interesting if you look at the way the people are dressed. There's some beautiful ball gowns, but then you see some very 40s slacks, and when we were looking at closer, you could see like a nurse's uniform. So a variety of clothing depending on what people were doing that day, no doubt. The band also played for marches. You can see the chapel in the background there, and participated in parades in downtown Thomasville. Of course, holiday dinners were important occasions. And as Mr. Flowers had pledged, the community did indeed throw their support 100% behind the effort. This is from a publication given to troops at Finney, and it pointed out some of the locations of importance. You can read over on the right: the bus terminal, the theater, the depot, the YMCA, and the USO Center on Broad, and the Martha Lee bus lines, named for Martha Neal Stringer and her brother, ran 24 trips a day to Finney. I don't think we have that consistent a service today, do we? Have bus service in Thomasville, 24 trips anywhere. So they could get back and forth to town. The Colonial Dames donated to decorate 10 rooms at Finney, and volunteers served in the Red Cross and the Gray Ladies. Local citizens donated plants and shrubs to landscape the grounds. They donated books to the library, and they also contributed their spare rooms for visiting family members. They were asked to register any spare rooms they had, because you can imagine the number of people coming to town to visit these soldiers, to register them with the Red Cross so that they would have a list at all times of accommodations. They were offered compensation for those accommodations. This appears to be some local folks admiring some of the items made in one of the shops. Finney Findings was a newsletter on the hospital grounds that started as a bi-weekly, became a weekly, and ultimately a daily. And you'll see at the top a slogan, "Lifting Better Up to the Best." This was adopted by those folks serving at Finney in a contest that was held to summarize the mission. So that was the slogan that they chose for themselves. And each of these issues in this particular series came from a different part. This, as you see, was the post exchange. The next one, the occupational therapy, with a number of items made by patients at the hospital. The dental issue, recreation, again, very important, physiotherapy. The music issue. In addition to playing for dances on the base and parades, the band broadcast a half-hour concert every Saturday afternoon over WPAX to the community, and WPAX also provided a link to the base, so they operated daily broadcast over station FGH, of course for Finney General Hospital, through their link to WPAX. The medical wards that you see here, pretty austere, but some pretty amazing treatment. Throughout 1945, troops continued to pour in. The largest number of troops ever to arrive was January 1st, 1945, following the Battle of the Bulge. The need for people to care for the troops kept increasing, and they activated WACs to also help with medical care. But finally, the end of World War II concluded the need for services at Finney, and it closed on December 15th, 1945. So a reasonably short time, and in that time they had treated 23,055 patients. So tremendous number of lives touched. And when you think about the things that had come into use during that period, penicillin was fairly new, streptomycin wasn't used till near the end of the war. They had a whole ward in the orthopedic ward devoted to the use of penicillin for bone infections. But with these new medicines and with the innovations introduced by Dr. Finney in World War I, they were able to save 97 out of every 100 soldiers who reached a hospital during World War II. This is taken from a little publication that Finney produced at the conclusion of their service, and you can see they rounded off to benefactor of 20,000 soldiers, but we thought some of these images would give you a better idea of the size of this complex, which had really become a to itself. It was at its maximum, over 200 buildings connected by almost 9 miles of covered walkways. This was a map that gave you the layout. This is the entrance out onto Pine Tree Boulevard up here at the top. And Melissa has very kindly straightened these pictures out so that you can see them a little better. The chapel on the left, the laundry that they did finally get built with ventilation on the right, the gymnasium at the bottom. In front of the water tower, which was the tallest structure, this was the unloading platform where soldiers brought in, the theater on the right, and barracks down at the bottom. No, wards, excuse me, for the patients. The main entrance on Pine Tree, again, the water tower, which through its connections with the city of Thomasville provided 250,000 gallons of water a day, and some of the barracks over on the left. This is a warehouse, the ball diamond down at the bottom, and a day room over on the right. And then some interior scenes that we have no other pictures of, the bowling alley, the library, and again, the post exchange, another picture of the pool and the flagpole circle, which is still there. At the end of World War II, it was only a matter of months before Finney General was transferred to the VA, the Veterans Administration, and it became a domiciliary for 20 years. In 1966, it was transferred to the state of Georgia, and most of you will know it today as the site of Southwestern State Hospital, which this year is celebrating its 40th anniversary. So it's interesting to look and see what remains, and we're indebted to Francis for these pictures. Francis Parker. These are some of the barracks still standing, the chapel, which is still used weekly, the sentry gates that go back to Finney, the railroad leading into the unloading platform, and of course that water tower, which is no longer used but still stands in a very imposing manner. And on this site, right in front of Southwestern, on October the 4th at 10 a.m., we will be dedicating a historic marker, a Georgia State historic marker, commemorating Finney General Hospital and the impact on this community and the many lives that it touched. The success of this application is due to a lot of work by a lot of people. First of all, we're indebted to Joe and Francis Parker, who showed up at the door one day and said, you know, we really feel like Finney General should have a marker, and little did they know what they were getting into. We're indebted to the Thomasville Town Committee and to several of you as generous individuals who helped underwrite the erection of the marker, to Joe Brown, who secured the official Army records, and to Francis, who poured over those records in our archives in order to compile the history of Finney and then reduce it down to only 4 pages, which the application permitted us. So all of those people owe a vote of thanks. We owe a vote of thanks, and we hope you'll come out on the 4th. Francis will tell you a little bit more about this process, but I think the highlight of our program today is to hear from some of the folks who can actually remember Finney. And so we're delighted. Our first speaker will be Mrs. Catherine Reed, followed by Martha Lee Davis, and then Francis Parker. And then we're going to open up the floor. If any of you have reminiscences you'd like to share, we certainly hope that you'll do that. Thank you so much for your kind attention. You okay with that?
Thank you. Are you all there? Well, we have a million things I could tell you, but of course, you don't get much for your 97 word. So, we had Hilton, well, we both were Quakers in a way, peace, arguing for peace, and Hilton's brother was in doing some work of that, but as soon as Pearl Harbor came, Hilton knew they would need doctors, and he immediately enlisted. But then he was 6'4", and you couldn't get uniforms for them. And if you did get a uniform, well, if you run down and tell somebody you got it, and then somebody else. But the point was that he volunteered and was sent to Washington first just to learn where you put those things on them, like that. And then in September of having had a hot summer, we were sent to Battle Creek, Michigan. Well, that was known as a cold place too. They took old Dr. Kellogg's hospital there to get ready. They still hadn't seen any patients or anything. And then it was, I think, still ice on the ground, and we were sent to Finney General Hospital in May. And then we didn't have clothes for them. They were having a real rough time. But we spent the first night with Bill Watt, Uncle Bill Watt. Uncle Bob White, thank you. And someone had told us that people in Thomasville were renting out houses and rooms and what. So we went in the first one and spent one night, and that was the first time I had met a cockroach. It was on the newspaper, on the paper that held our suitcase. I must have written home to grandmother at one point, and she said, "Dear, I'm so sorry to hear what has happened to you." I had a neighbor once, and she had a cockroach. And maybe if you do this, you could get rid of that one. But we spent the night, and first in the morning comes a nice-looking woman, a very nice lady. She was living in a house in the bottom part of it, where some relatives were, with this beautiful 3-year-old little child. "I hate you," she said. That was the greeting. And if you think he'll never let Celia Lockerman get away with that. At any rate, her manners were such that we became very good friends anyway. The first thing they had to do was receive some congressman out on the field to the right of where you saw the entrance there. And this is June, and it was hot, and he preached forever. It was dreadful, but by this time they were beginning to have a few doctors come in. It was all staffed for other people before that, and so Hilton was one of the ones that came in on that group. And he turned up he was made head of the medical part, and he had a wonderful group of people. And he could say a lot that wonderful doctors were sent to Finney just on that first day. And he had his pick. He didn't have his pick. They were sent to him, all young doctors. And he was able to work with them, and some of them, we kept track of a lot of them. First of all, they liked Thomasville, which brings me to the point that everybody in Thomasville was just great to us. They did nice things, no matter, well, they did, you just felt as if we're not what Celia said at all, because it was, well, like Jim Pettigrew, who did I say this time? Who repaired watches, and he took it very seriously, no matter how busy he was or what, he took care of a soldier. He's never let a soldier go away without his taking care of him. But that was true of Colonel Brown and his wife Ruby. They were the most wonderful people. Everybody in town, I think, did something nice to make them feel welcome. And Colonel Brown and his wife did everything to reciprocate, was that the good? Reciprocate and make a lot of people think they might want to come to live in Thomasville. I had a job, and well, I thought I was going to do what we did at home for that month before we were set Army. You would go and work doing knitting or sewing or something, and they say that kept the people at home all busy, you know. And so I thought you would do that, so I got down here, and we're in top of a building. Well, if you all know where the top of the building was, that's where the ladies were working. I thought they were working, but I came home to Hilton, and I said, honey, all they were talking about the devastating love affair of that minister. So I didn't go back to that. And I went to, maybe I could do maybe I could work at a bank. So I went to the commercial bank, and the man wasn't there, Connie, but the first one, George's husband. Lonnie. He was the president at that time, but he was off for that day, and so nobody wanted me. And so then I went to the other, and so I worked for $15 a week, and I had a very satisfactory time. But everybody was kind in every way, and bit by bit as the officers came in with their families, and they were given all the possible help they could to get a place for them to stay. And then after they start getting the patients themselves, that's where a good friend of mine now said, really, it was the money that came into Thomasville in making room for people's coming to see their family that had a lot to do with the way things went in Thomasville. And she told me, because she and I, at this point, ran a bank in the hospital. That was big business. In the morning, we'd go out and pick up the money. I would be picked up with the money, and we would start. The first girl there did have to get sick, so I ended up head of it, and I didn't know anything about it. But when that great, huge door opened after I let the cop go sent the night before, and my gate opened, and there was the money already again there. That was the greatest relief, because I thought that big thing would never open. But the thing about it was we would sell them. The boys were encouraged to buy bonds, and we would sell them, and on the next time they were paid, then they took them back. So the boys were busy moving their bonds back and forth, but the government got a good record of selling bonds. We did prepare for paying them when our soldiers were paid in cash. I mean, the younger boys, and so we would give them as many dimes and nickels as they were going to need by the hundreds. That was a big job for us. But the thing that was, when I I'm not going to go on forever. I would be picked up when I balanced it for the day. I'd be picked up by an officer of the bank, and they'd go in, I bounced out, and finally he said, you know, I don't want to be critical or appreciative of your taking over when you have to substitute like this, but when you said you have 2 rows of these figures, and we couldn't, if we were questioned, we wouldn't have known, well, that's my dirty money, and that's my clean money. It was filthy money. We did have a nice look, as you could see, the chapel, and it was just that same chapel, and it was hot weather when we first came in town here, and by the time they got going, several of us, good number, would go and have chapel with the man, and then we didn't have to wear stockings then, because around the chapel, it didn't matter, you could go load on that, which we did, but we got to know some of the chaplains that were turned out there. They were nice people. I still had one on my Christmas card list up till last time, but they were good people. I think the fact that Colonel Brown and Ruby set such high standards, and Colonel Brown just saw every seriously sick patient every day. He'd walk in those hot bedrooms, and they were hot too, but he was there regularly for it. And but we also had fun sometimes. We would have watermelon cutting some evening. We have 4 or 5, you have a good watermelon, and come and spend it, and open it, do it. So that was part of our fun. But it wasn't what we were asking for at all. But people, the people would say how nice it is here. Don't you think you could ever? Well, I'm thinking of coming. Oh, I have. Well, a lot of people began to wonder, and some of them visited some of the other people who were already here in Thomasville, and one family, most of you knew eventually, that they were from Cleveland, and really the missus didn't have much interest in coming down to Thomasville, but her husband did, but she had her bridge, and she was just a very active person in another part of the country. And they had rented a place or borrowed a place, and until she heard her husband say, I'm fixing to go to town, she knew she lost her job. And so they bought a house. I think from the point of view of everybody wanting to be helpful and do everything they could, and it went even so far as the man at the gate. And when I can remember distinctly, I was driving out, I don't know why, we were on the same schedule, but at this point I remember distinctly, I had the car and goes out, and I could go in, and I came up to the guard at the gate, and I said, can I go in here and get my husband? He said, I don't know, they just told me to wave him in. So there was that type of war. But I will say that from this point, that we became very fond of a lot of people here, and we kept in touch with a lot of people, and we still do, and I'm very happy, and Hilton was too, that we decided to come here. But Betty Clare still isn't sure that I will ever pass Southern 101.
I think all of you know her, but.
Well, I don't have as many memories as Catherine has, because I got into Finney in '44, right before it closed, almost. But my first experience with Finney was visiting a brother of mine who was a paratrooper, and he had made a jump in Belgium and had a lot of flak wounds. So he was in the hospital at Finney, so we would visit him there. But then I graduated from high school. I was living in Quitman. I grew up in Quitman. And after visiting my brother and seeing the hospital, I thought, well, maybe that's what I wanted to do when I graduated. So I took the civil service test and I passed. And I ended up in orthopedics with Major Bug. He was head of orthopedics. And there was Captain Peterson. Does anybody remember Captain Peterson? And Captain Mosian, several of them. I remember Major Bugs he must have been 6'4", don't you think? And never smiled. He was very professional. I hear he went on to Mayo from Finney, but I understand his children were terrors. Maybe that's why he didn't smile. But my job was transcribing the doctor's diagnoses from dictaphones to the patient's records. And there were just 3 of us in this office doing this. And our boss was Eileen Neesmith. Does anybody remember her? She was from Pelham. And she was a character. She was tough, but very sweet, very fun. She was fun to be with. I was there when Finney closed, and I can remember the trains coming up to take the remaining patients away. And after it closed, I transferred to Fort Eustis, Virginia, which was a prisoner of war camp, a railroad transportation center, and a naval station. And I was working in transportation. And when it closed, I transferred back to Moody Field, Valdosta, and worked in personnel. And then it closed, and I came back to Thomasville and worked at the VA. It's a VA domiciliary. And I worked there longer than I did at Finney. I had some interesting experiences. When I came back to the VA, I was in a secretarial pool, and I worked the lab, the TB and x-ray. And I'll never forget Dr. Waga in the lab. He would do autopsies, and he would put me behind a screen while he did the autopsies, and I had to take dictation. And then one time in x-ray, we were looking, Dr. Cheney, we were looking at this x-ray, and this man looked like he had this coil of wire in his stomach. And the doctors were really concerned. They didn't know what in the world, and they got the man to come down and look at the x-ray because he'd never complained. And come to find out, he just had his pajamas wired together with the wire, and it showed up on his x-ray. Everybody, it just seemed like at Finney and at the VA, everybody was so considerate and so kind and very professional. Everybody was. And it was a pleasure to work there. When I came back to the VA, we moved to Thomasville. And that's where I met Jasper. So that's why I'm here today.
Thank you, Martha. Miss Francis Parker will say a few words. Very good.
Well, this all started one day, the idea, J.W. Blanton and Joe and I were having lunch at the plaza, and they got to talking about old times. Then they started talking about World War II, and then they talked about Finney General, and they got they were talking about how no one knows today, most people in Thomasville today don't know there was an Army hospital out there. So we went home, we got home, Joe said, we just got to see about getting something done and put a marker out there. Well, that was his bee in his bonnet, and when Joe gets a bee in his bonnet, he doesn't let go. So we called Ann Harrison, and she agreed to work with us on trying to get a marker through the Georgia Historical Society. So we met with her, and you had to do a historical document, and then you had to do all the other little details. So Joe and I decided we would help by doing the historical marker, and Ann would do the rest. Well, I didn't realize how involved that was. You had to be like a term paper. So anyway, I started out in the file here at the museum, and it's very interesting. If you ever get a chance to just come over, pull it out, and look at it, it's just really fun to look at. Then I went to the library and looked up old microfilms from the newspaper from the 40s, and it was interesting because everything on the front page of every issue of the newspaper was nothing but war news. If you wanted to know anything else about Thomasville or Finney or anything, it was always inside the paper. So everything, with one exception, on June 16th there was a special edition of the Thomasville Times-Enterprise, and it had, I think it was 5 sections, and it was donated entirely to Finney. So any of y'all that were here or new people, you would enjoy reading a lot of that. Then I called Joe Brown, who is here today, and he graciously agreed to see if he couldn't get the official documents of Finney during its existence, and he did. And I really used that as much for the documentation as I did anything else I found. When I found out I had to be like a term paper, I called Lynn Stiles. And everybody knows Lynn Stiles, and she said, yes, she would help me. So I took my rough copy over there. I really felt like I was in high school again. She gave it back, and it was just really involved. But after several tries and Ann reading it, and we got together, and she finally gave her stamp of approval and brought it over to Ann. So I sent that off. I can't tell y'all how good Ann Harrison is to work with. She is just wonderful. If it had not been for her, she contacted people all over the state. She contacted people in Thomasville. She did Southwestern. I mean, she did all the little details. So I think it's because of Ann that we're going to have a marker on October the 4th. So that's my doings.
Thank you for those kind words. Our final thing on the application, Francis will remember, was who for the state of Georgia could sign permission for us to erect a marker on state property. Nobody down the chain of command wanted to sign the form releasing the right to put it on state property, and the deadline was approaching, and I finally said, do we have to go to Atlanta and get the governor to sign off on this? But finally, they passed the word down, and they let the chief administrator at Southwestern sign, and those folks have been great to work with, and they'll be there as part of the dedication, and we hope you will be. Are there other folks here that have personal memories you would like to share? If any. Anybody? Bill?
In 1942, when construction began on Finney, the local American Legion Post number 31 undertook to build a small structure across Pine Tree Boulevard, which would act as a carry-out place for the workers to come and buy lunches. And they made sandwiches and hot lunches and potato chips and cold drinks for the workers to come and buy each day. And that lasted until the construction was over. The reason I know about this, my father delivered meat from his grocery store to that place every day, and Dr. Chip Hancock's mother, Cora, managed the lunchroom. And they made a hot meal and cold sandwiches every day that the construction went on. Thanks to post number 31.
Thank you, Bill. This lady back here, would you like to use the microphone? Okay. Okay.
Now, I have my husband was a patient there. He was sent from Jackson, Mississippi to Finney. And then he was sent from there to Daytona Beach. But it was a lady foot injured from Germany. And he had the infection you're talking about. In fact, I don't have a very good voice still. I had thyroid surgery. But anyway, he kept having to redo surgery on his leg time and time again. So finally in May of '44, we decided to go ahead and get married. So we married in a cast. They finally got him where he could go to Daytona to swim to try to help that leg. But that's my members. I have a lot of members of the bus, a lot of members of the ward. And it was just a lot of members. When I picked in the paper last night and saw Finney General Hospital, I said, oh, I've got to go to that.
Thank you for coming and sharing with us. Anyone else?
Teresa?
And I don't have as exciting memories, but I'd like to just attest to the relationships of the people who came and us local folks. As a tiny child on Glenwood Drive, the house next to us where Martha Neal Elford grew up was somehow rented out. I mean, I was little then, I don't know the circumstances, but it was a doctor at Finney General, and I believe his name, Catherine, was Dr. Gaines. And his wife was Jean Talmadge's sister. And they lived next door to us those years when he was out there. But talking about the relationship, we formed a nice relationship with them, and I remember even as a 12 or 14-year-old stopping in South Carolina to visit them on the way to Washington the first time. So I think the community, as was stated, did enjoy and receive the people that came, and remember Mother enjoying her very much.
Anyone else?
I want to share something.
Frank? Okay.
When we were doing all this, Joe told the story that his daddy took him out to Finney to see the trainload of injured soldiers coming in, and it had to be January 1st, 1945, that along there, because he said that he can remember the train being parked at Finney and the cars that held the wounded soldiers went all the way back into town. That many coming in. And then one other thing, when I was doing my research, and Walter knows this, I ran across a little blurb in the paper that said, Jasper Davis gets his wings. I don't know what year it was. Was that when he married Mobley? No. But I made a copy of it alive, and I took it to Jasper Mobley back then.
Right. Thank you, Francis. Well, if there are no other comments, we'd just like to invite you to join us for some refreshments, and please take time to look around the exhibits. There are the things from Finney are in this case, and then an exhibit all down the hallway with many of the pictures you saw in the presentation. So if you thought you recognized someone, you can take a closer look. And I do want to express my particular appreciation to Melissa Sanford, my right hand, who put together PowerPoint. I'm sort of helpless when it comes to that without her. So she did all the artwork for me, and I'm very grateful in many ways. Please join us. We'll be on the side of the road, so we may have to, many of us stand on October 4th at 10 a.m. when the marker will be unveiled. So we invite you to be there. Thank you for coming today. We appreciate it.